The snow had been falling since dawn, blanketing the land in silence. A wind howled through the rock crevices, carrying the cries of hungry crows circling above, ominous and unrelenting. And there, in the midst of white desolation, a small figure stumbled forward, leaving behind a trail of crimson bleeding into the snow. Her name was Clara. They used to say she didn't belong in a place like this. Her eyes were the color of northern lakes, her black hair long and straight like a river in autumn, but to the people of Silver Ridge, she was neither here nor there. The child of misfortune, they whispered, born of a Navajo mother and a drifting white man who vanished long ago. Clara existed in a space that didn't fit the town's tidy lines. She lived quietly on the edge of Silver Ridge, where wooden houses bore the scars of desert winds and whiskey solved more problems than prayer. Clara worked at Maureen's diner, the only woman in town widowed by war who still believed in offering shelter to the unwanted. Clara never laughed loudly. She never walked too quickly. Her every move seemed measured, as if afraid to tear through the fragile silence of a land always on the verge of thunder. She rose before the sun, fetched water, wiped down tables with a warm cloth, then left without a sound before the bell on the door rang open. Sometimes Maureen caught her just standing still, staring into the distant mountains where snow and stone mingled like a dream she hadn't yet named. No one knew how Clara came to be injured. The first to find the blood in the snow was a horse wrangler. He said he saw small footprints veering into the woods, staggering, then disappearing in the deeper drifts. No one followed. In Silver Ridge, Clara was something in between, not Navajo enough to be a daughter of the soil, and not white enough to warrant concern. That night, the cold snapped harder, the kind of wind that slammed shutters even when no hands touched them. While the rest of the town huddled close to hearths and bowls of venison stew. Somewhere in the trees beyond, someone was clinging to her last breath. Clara didn't scream. Her lips were cracked, her vision foggy with hunger and blood loss. But she held tightly to a small leather pouch tucked against her chest, the old Navajo cloth her mother once used to swaddle her. She didn't want to die. But the cold, and the silence, pressed in like ghosts. Just before she lost consciousness, she thought she heard it, a soft sound, like hooves on snow, but maybe that was just the last flicker of hope trying to sound like rescue. When she woke, she wasn't dead. Clara's body was heavy, wrapped in something rough and warm, like the embrace of earth itself. She didn't know how long she had been unconscious, but the cold was no longer inside her bones. A fire crackled nearby, low, controlled, and ancient. She heard the soft hiss of wood giving itself up to the flames. Her vision blurred, but when she turned her head slightly, she saw him, a man, sitting not far from her, tending the fire, still, silent, the kind of silence that wasn't absence, but presence, the way mountains don't speak but still hold stories. He didn't look at her, not right away. His profile was cut in shadow, high cheekbones and long dark hair tied back with leather cord. A woven blanket draped over his shoulders, and beside him, a bow and a quiver rested like part of his body. He was Navajo, she didn't need to ask. The land had shaped him, just as it had tried to unmake her. When he finally turned to her, his eyes didn't startle her. They were steady, calm, like they had already seen too much, and judged nothing. "You're awake," he said, voice low, his words wrapped in a slight Navajo accent. Clara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He reached over without a word and handed her a tin cup of warm broth. She drank slowly, the heat trembling in her chest like a second heartbeat. "You found me," she whispered, after the silence settled again. He didn't answer right away. He looked back at the fire. "No," he said, "you were already finding your way back. I only helped you finish the walk." She didn't understand what he meant, but something about it calmed her more than any explanation would have. His name was Elon. He didn't tell her, but later she'd hear it from a passing elder. In Navajo, it meant friendly, but he did not act friendly. Not in the usual way. He didn't smile, didn't ask questions. He simply kept the fire going, left food beside her, and brought water when her lips cracked from fever. When she coughed, he moved closer, not to touch, but just to be near enough that she felt less alone. The snow outside kept falling. Day after day, wrapping the world in silence. They were nestled in a small cave, hidden in the forest above Silver Ridge. He had built it with his own hands. Or so she guessed. Everything inside bore the mark of care: a carved wooden bowl, a bone-handled knife, bundles of dried herbs tied with sinew. One night, she asked, "Why did you help me?" He was skinning a rabbit then. His hands paused, but he didn't look up. "Because someone once helped me," he said, "and I didn't die because of it." That was all. Still, in the days that followed, she saw it. The quiet glances when he thought she was sleeping. The way he left her a second blanket without saying a word. The way he placed her pouch, her mother's cloth, beside her each morning like a sacred offering. Outside, the world still spun in judgment. Clara didn't know what would happen when she returned to town, or if she'd ever be allowed to. But in this frozen place, with this man who said so little and gave so much, she felt safer than she ever had. A connection was forming, not from words, not even from gratitude, but from something older, something the snow could not cover and time could not freeze. The snow began to melt. Slowly at first, only a trickle from the cave's edge, where icicles wept like candles burning too long. Then came the thawing wind, the smell of pine and wet earth, and the low rumble of rivers breaking free. Winter was loosening its grip. But with the shifting weather came something else. The world creeping back in. Clara had begun to walk again. Her legs were still weak, but each step outside the cave was like reclaiming a piece of herself. Elan never hovered. He simply walked beside her, silent as always, his gaze scanning the horizon like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. Sometimes they didn't speak for hours. But one day, she looked at him and asked, "Do you ever go into Silver Ridge?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." "Because of me?" "No, because of them." It was the first time she heard something like pain in his voice. Not bitterness. Elan didn't seem capable of that. Just the weary ache of a man who had once believed in something and had it taken. She never pressed again. But soon, their silence was no longer theirs alone. Footprints began appearing near the creek, where none should have been. Once, Clara spotted a scrap of plaid cloth snagged on a thorn. Another time, Elan returned with tension in his shoulders and blood on his knife, not from a hunt, but from something he wouldn't explain. "Someone's looking for you," he said one night, sharpening his blade by the fire. "Why? I'm no one. You're someone to me." It was the first time he had said anything like that. The words felt heavier than the mountains around them. But they didn't have time to let them settle. One evening, while Elan was gone checking traps, Clara heard voices, harsh, slurred, men's voices, floating up from the woods. She froze. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more. Then came the barking of dogs. The sound cut through the trees like a warning bell. Clara clutched her leather pouch to her chest and ran. She didn't know the forest like Elan did. She stumbled through brush and branches, heart pounding like it would rip through her ribs. But no matter where she turned, the voices followed, closer now, crueler, shouting things she couldn't make out. Except one. Half-breed thief. They didn't want justice. They wanted to make something bleed. A shot rang out, then another. Clara dropped behind a fallen tree, her breath a broken thing. For a moment, all she could hear was the wind in the pines. And then, Elan. He appeared like part of the storm. From the trees, from the dark, his bow was drawn before he even spoke. His eyes locked not on her, but on the shadows behind her. She didn't see what happened next. Only the snap of string. A scream. The dogs yelping and fleeing. Then a voice she knew all too well. Sheriff Daly. "Elan, don't be stupid," the sheriff growled from behind a tree. "This ain't your fight. Hand her over. She's got questions to answer." Clara couldn't see Elan's face, but she saw his body shift slightly, lowering his bow but not surrendering. "She's not going back," Elan said. "She's harboring stolen goods. Word as she took from the McLennan family before vanishing." "You want to be charged for helping her?" Clara gasped. "I didn't steal anything." "That's not true." But truth had little value when spoken by women like her. "I'll come quietly," Clara whispered, stepping forward. "If you don't hurt him." "No," Elan said quietly. "You don't owe them anything." But it was too late. A sudden rush. A gunshot cracked through the night, and Clara screamed. Elan didn't fall. The bullet had missed, but the sound sent the forest into chaos. Horses reared, men shouted, and when it all cleared, Clara was gone. Sheriff Daly had taken her. They bound her wrists, threw her onto a horse like luggage. She looked back once, through tears and smoke, and saw Elan, still standing, motionless, staring after her, his jaw clenched not in anger, but in something deeper, powerless, grieving, like watching the sky swallow the last star. The days that followed blurred into numbness. She was thrown into a holding cell in Silver Ridge, her name smeared, her story twisted. No one asked why she ran. No one cared why she bled in the snow. Maureen tried to help, but her words held no weight against the McLennan family's lies. They say you stole silver, Maureen whispered one night through the bars. They say you seduced their boy and tricked him into giving it to you. Clara laughed bitterly. Their boy tried to drag me into a barn. When I fought back, he said I'd pay. And now she was paying. With silence, with shame, with memories that felt more like dreams the longer she sat alone. But even in that cold cell, she clung to the pouch Elan had placed beside her. Somehow it had not been taken. Inside, beneath the folds, was a small carved wooden bead, polished smooth. She hadn't noticed it before. It was shaped like a hawk in flight. She held it close, whispering his name in the dark, and prayed he hadn't vanished like everyone else who had ever tried to love her. It was the 13th day. 13 days since Clara had been dragged back to Silver Ridge. 13 nights since Elan had vanished into the trees, taking her last hope with him. And today, they were preparing to send her away for trial, though everyone in town knew what that meant. The McLennans had money, the sheriff had pride, and women like Clara didn't get second chances. Not out here. The morning sun spilled cold and cruel across the jailhouse floor. Outside, townsfolk gathered like birds around something dying. Clara sat still in her cell, the wooden hawk between her palms, worn smooth by worry. Maureen stood beside her, holding a worn shawl. I tried, she said softly. No one listens. I'm sorry. Clara didn't reply. She was past anger now, past even fear. What stayed was something deeper, a kind of waiting, not for justice, not for mercy, just for it all to be over. Until the hooves came. It started as a low, thunderous murmur, then the clatter of iron on frozen dirt. Townsfolk turned, squinting into the morning haze. Then they saw them, riders, a line of them, not townsmen, not soldiers, Navajo, dozens of them, all dressed in ceremonial coats, feathers woven into their braids, riding with quiet, unstoppable grace, and at their head, atop a coal-black horse, was Elan. But he was not the silent man who once gathered snow to cool her fever. He was something more now. Every line of his body, every beat of his horse's hooves, spoke one message. I have come back. He rode straight to the sheriff's office without a word, dismounted, walked past startled townsfolk as though they were made of mist. When he stepped inside, the air shifted. Sheriff Daly stood up fast, his hand on his holster. What the hell is this? Elan looked at him calmly. She goes free. She's under arrest. Elan didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat and placed something on the sheriff's desk. It was a deed to the canyon lands east of Hollow Pass. Elan said, my family's land, all of it. The sheriff stared. You're trading your land for a thief? She didn't steal, but if that's what it costs to buy back truth, then so be it. People had gathered now, outside the jail, in the street, peering through windows. No one spoke. Even the wind had stilled, as if the mountains themselves were watching. Sheriff Daly looked at the deed, then at Elan, then at the window where Clara's eyes watched from behind iron bars. And something cracked. Not his pride, perhaps, but his certainty. You're serious? He asked. Elan nodded once. You can tell them whatever story saves your face. But she walks out of here. Today. And slowly. Impossibly. The sheriff nodded. The cell door clicked open. Clara didn't move at first. She just stared. What did you do? What I had to. You gave up everything. I had nothing until I found you in the snow. She stepped forward, her fingers trembling. I don't understand. Why would you do that? He looked at her. eyes full of the same quiet strength that once knelt beside her. Wrapped her in his blanket, and never asked for anything in return. Because you were never meant to be thrown away. And in that moment, everything in her cracked wide open. The pain, the shame, the hunger to be believed. She pressed her forehead to his chest and wept. Not from sadness, but from something older, something like coming home. The townspeople didn't cheer, but they didn't stop them either. Some turned away, some lowered their hats. Maureen stood near the doorway, hands over her mouth, tears streaking her cheeks. Clara and Elan walked side by side through the dusty street. Behind them, the Navajo riders began to move again, parting like a river to let the two pass. No one raised a gun. No one called her witch. And for the first time in her life, Clara felt like a woman who could choose her own name. The cabin sat at the edge of a clearing, tucked beneath the arms of two leaning pines. It wasn't much, just timber and stone stitched together by weather and time, but it stood warm and quiet, against the winter that pressed in from the north. A curl of smoke danced from the chimney. Inside, a blanket was draped gently across a rocking chair. Fresh cut firewood rested near the hearth. A kettle hummed over the flame. And beside it, Clara sat with her knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in the same Navajo blanket that had once saved her life. Snow fell outside the window. Not a storm this time. Just soft, steady flakes that whispered down from the heavens like absolution. Elan was outside, tending the horse. It was always like him to work before resting. Even now, when no one asked him to. It had been 6 months since they left Silver Ridge. They never looked back. Maureen had packed Clara a satchel the night they disappeared, bread, salve, a folded ribbon that once belonged to her mother. She'd pressed it into Clara's hands and whispered, "Find somewhere the world can't reach you. Then build something new." They'd ridden west until the trails grew silent and the rivers spoke a different language. Until they found this place, half forgotten, half promised. Clara had begun again. It wasn't easy. The nights were cold. The grief still crept in like smoke beneath a door. And sometimes, in the dark, her old fears whispered, "You're not worthy of peace. You don't get to have love." But every time she broke, Elan was there, not with grand declarations, but with something quieter. A cup of hot tea left beside her bed, a feather tucked into the rafters, a quiet hum while he carved birds from cedar, leaving them on the windowsill like sentinels. One morning, she asked him, "How did you learn to love someone who carries so much darkness?" He'd looked at her a long time, then answered, "Because I've walked with it too." They built their home slowly. A garden bloomed near the creek. Wildflowers began to root in the clearing. And one day, Clara found herself laughing, really laughing, as a squirrel ran off with the bread she'd just baked. The sound startled her. It had been so long. They found orphans along the way. A boy with no name hiding in the rocks. A girl who had stopped speaking after soldiers came through her village. Elan brought them home, wordlessly, as if he knew Clara's heart would recognize its own. And she did. She taught them to sew, to write their names in the dirt, to listen for the sound of hawks overhead. Their cabin became more than shelter. It became a place where the discarded could grow roots again. And then, one morning, Elan returned from the hills with something clutched in his palm. It was a ring, not silver, not gold, just polished stone carved into a circle, smoothed by wind and time. He said nothing, only held it out, eyes steady. Clara's breath caught. She didn't need fanfare, not after all they'd been through, not after knowing what it meant to be broken and still be chosen. She nodded, tears in her eyes. That night, they lit a fire beneath the open sky. The children danced. Elan's brothers came from the canyonlands, bringing gifts and song. There was no priest, no paper, just stars, and the whispering pines, and a promise exchanged in silence. "I see you," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "I will never look away," he answered. They never returned to Silver Ridge. But some say that when the snow melts and the wildflowers bloom, you can see horses running through the mist near the foothills, led by a woman with fire in her hair and a man who rides like he's made of the wind. They say she was once a witch, that he was once a ghost. But out here, names lose their weight. What matters is the fire that stays lit, the children who now sleep safe, The hearts that find their way back to one another after all seems lost. And if you listen closely, you might hear her laugh. A sound that once broke through silence like thunder, now soft as spring rain. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Because out here in the West, bullets may travel fast, but love, if it's true, always finds its way home.